We're going to be doing a presentation on the #MeToo hashtag that some of you may have seen on social media. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how it affects campus sexual assault primarily, since we're here on Valpo's campus. And we're going to share some stories with you that are actual #MeToo stories that have been submitted from students.
Okay, hi. So just to start out, we have some numbers on, can I see my phone? Yep. We have some numbers on campus sexual violence, just some statistics to give you guys an idea. So 11.2% of all students will experience rape or sexual assault while they're in college. And then these students are at an increased risk during their freshman year, the first few months of college. Among college women, 9 in 10 victims of rape and sexual assault knew their victim, and additionally, 35% of attempted rapes happened during a date. And 1 in 20 college women reported being raped since the beginning of the year. So the #MeToo campaign, the hashtag started actually back in 2006 on MySpace, but it really didn't gain any traction until this last year, in October, when celebrities started using the hashtag. So the hashtag is beautiful because it empowers through its simplicity. It gives a voice to all victims of any kind of sexual assault to share their stories.
So like we said, we do have a few stories that we'll be sharing with you guys. A few of these did happen on Valpo's campus, and a few were submitted online as well. So this first story happened in 2015. It was Easter Vigil in the chapel. Maybe too loud, I'll take a step back. It was Easter Vigil in the chapel a few years ago. The service had just concluded and everyone was running around sharing the peace. An acquaintance of mine pretended to hug me, but fondled my breasts instead. I was wearing my choir robe. So the second story, this was circa 2014. I was a 20-year-old student. He was a renowned professor on his subject. I needed to get the instruction sheet about a take-home test. I called him on a Friday afternoon to ask when I could come to stop by his office and pick it up. He suggested that since I lived 2 blocks away from him, I should just stop at his apartment on Saturday so I'd be able to work on the assignment over the weekend. When I arrived, he made his move. I quickly made up some story about being engaged and got out of there as fast as I could. I never went back to class and took an incomplete in the course. It meant that I had to take an additional course the next semester and get my degree a year late. I never said a word to anyone, never explained to my parents why it took the additional time and expense, and never told the school about their charismatic, brilliant creep of a professor.
Okay. So this next story happened in 2016, and the victim was 18. I was nestled into my first midterm season of university in the fall of 2016 when an unwanted conversation with an unfamiliar man changed my life. Studying one day in the library, a man came and stood beside me, hovering over my book bag and using the space upon the desk above for his laptop. "Hey, I'm a TA for that class," he said, gesturing towards my intro-level communications textbook. I told him my name and he asked if I lived on campus. "I lived on campus my first year too. What building did you get?" he asked me. I told him what building I was in. "Oh, my friend had that building. What floor did you get?" I told him what floor I lived on. Then he pulled out his laptop. "So you don't have to study. I have the midterm right here," he told me. He then went on to describe that he will only show exams to me and give A's to students that provide him with sexual favors. He made the actions to go with the statement, pretending to give head. I thought it must be a horrible joke, but he didn't laugh. When I got home, I opened the Canvas page for the course and scrolled under people. I clicked on the course's TAs. He wasn't one of them. I spent the night alone, confused and scared about what happened, scared about being a woman from a small town in the city for the first time, about living on my own, about misogyny and inequality, about the power of men. I never saw him again until I came back for my second semester. The class began and I sat between 2 already taken chairs, and he sat across from me, not as a TA, but as a student, watching me throughout the class. The walls felt as if they were closing in on me, and the teacher's words were a jumble in my thoughts of what would happen next. I left class immediately in fear. Days followed without seeing him until he was all I saw. Every day in the dining hall, which was mandatory for students living on residency, there he was eating pizza. I left whenever he was there after he had attempted to sit at my table. I just opted not to eat. In the following days, I made my way to the student conduct office. I was nervous and rubbed my sweaty hands on my jeans repeatedly as I waited for the advisor to come out of her office. She greeted me with a pen and paper and asked me to share my story. I told her everything. When I got to the part where he asked me for my name and where I lived, she scolded me, telling me that what I did was the wrong way to handle the situation. She continued commenting on my story, telling me I should have just walked away and asking if he ever actually touched me. She barely wrote anything down and finished the meeting by telling me that the incident cannot be categorized as sexual harassment, and then wished me a good day and ushered me out of her office. I felt hopeless after the meeting, but I took to the Facebook group In Power and shared my story, asking girls who had experienced this particular individual to email me their stories. The response was overwhelming. The post got hundreds of comments and likes, both of support and of pledges to send in emails. But what we heard back from the head of security was that the accusations of hearsay were useless to my case and harmful to the TA man's academic reputation, and told me to tell my friends to stop emailing. I walked from class back to my dorm every night afraid. Coming home from work late one night, I heard someone walking behind me. I felt a ringing in my ears, my breathing quickened. The steps got closer to me and I began to cry. The figure passed in front of me. It wasn't him, and I cried harder. I was afraid of men everywhere. In the end, it wasn't my story and experiences that caused the individual to permanently be expelled from Simon Fraser University, but that of another girl. I am in my second year at SFU with a renowned hope that it will be the camaraderie and strength of women to stand together against adversity, that it will be the female peers that I am in class with every day who will fight for our right to have a voice against the rigid rules of patriarchy in society.
So these issues matter, but there's really no point in fighting against it unless we're all going to be against it. And sexual violence is a type of violence that's often underreported and overlooked. And even when it is reported, there's a shame and a stigma that comes with it. So whether you're a student, faculty, or member of the community, it's important to say something if you see something.
So to wrap up, we have some resources for you to seek help here on campus. And we just want to say that as the Athena Society, this is something we advocate for very often. This is stuff that happens to people we know and love. And so if you need help, ask for it. And we're all here on campus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gregory Banks, and I am a torture survivor of the Chicago Police Department. You know, I was thinking about how was I going to present this today, because it's always been hard for me to talk about police brutality and what happened to me. But I'm more than just a survivor. I don't like just using that I am a survivor. I'm more than just a survivor. I am a father, I am a husband, I am a brother, I am also a college graduate. And it's been real difficult for me to talk about this. And it's been 34 years since this happened to me. But I wind up doing 21 years in the Illinois Department of Correction for a crime that I didn't commit. In 1983, I was arrested and I was detained in Chicago on 111 in Ellis. They arrested me at 8:30 and they transported me to Area 2 violent crime on the south side of Chicago. If y'all probably not familiar with it, but if you are from Chicago, is anybody in here from Chicago? Okay, so you know where 111 is at. And anyway, it was a brand new police station, and they had just changed it. Homicide used to be on 94th and College Grove. They had just changed it. But anyway, they arrested me and they took me into an interviewing room, and they handcuffed me to a ring in the wall. And I sat there, and there was another individual in there, but he was on the other end. And I sat there for maybe 6 or 7 hours. And Lieutenant Burge, at this time, he was a lieutenant. He became a commander after all this happened. Anyway, at approximately 2:30 in the morning, a detective came and got me and took me out of that room and put me in an adjacent room. And they set me down and they said, Gregory, we know you did it. We just want you to tell us why you did it. And so when I persisted in denial, John Byrne, which was a sergeant, took a .45 automatic out and stuck it in my mouth. And he said, you know what we're talking about. You're going to tell us what we want to hear. And when I persisted in denial, he took out a flashlight about this long, black flashlight. And he began to beat me across my chest and back. I fell out of the chair. And Charles Grunhart, which was the oldest of the three, he began to kick me, and they did all sorts of things to me. And so when I persisted in denial, a detective named Peter Dignan, I will never forget him, because he said to me, he said, we have something special for niggers. And he took out a plastic bag and placed it over my head. Now all this time I'm handcuffed and I'm on the ground. So just imagine this. If you can imagine, here it is, you defenseless. You don't know, I'm 20 years old. I don't know what to do. I'm scared to death, and it's 3 detectives beating me, placing a plastic bag over my head, calling me a nigger. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what was gonna happen to me. I was so bruised up from that situation. My legs had swollen. They had swole. I couldn't even walk. I was sliding across the floor like this. I couldn't even pick my legs up. And I wasn't a small guy, but I weighed about 180 pounds at 20 years old. I was about 180, 190 pounds. And that was a frightening thing. And I got convicted. And I served, and I did 21 years in the Illinois Department of Correction. And you think about, every time I see people being convicted of crimes that they didn't do, and what hurt me more than anything is that didn't nobody believe me. It took years and years and years before anybody believed us. And it was a lot of us that they did that too. Now, when you are in the penitentiary, you don't talk about stuff like that. You don't even want nobody to know that some men beat you and made you confess to a crime. You don't want nobody to know that. So you have to put on this image when you're in that place, because the penitentiary is a place that you will never ever want to be at. It was terrible. I was probably in one of the worst penitentiaries in the state of Illinois at that time, which was Pontiac Correctional Center. And this was during the 80s. And it was a terrible place to be, but I survived. I managed to survive, and I got back out here, and I began to live my life, but it was hard. You know, because my heart, I was hardened. You know, I had got hardened from being incarcerated for so long. I was hard, y'all. I didn't even, at one point in my life, it was a time that I didn't even care. You know, I was angry for a long time. I'm not angry anymore. You know, it's been a long time. That was in 1983. I got convicted in 1985, and most of y'all probably wasn't even born then. I'm 54 years old now, and my life has gotten better, but it is still a lot of individuals that are still incarcerated for crimes that they commit. And I'm going to give you some of their names. Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson been locked up for 34 years. He's still incarcerated right now. Melvin Jones, he's deceased. Anthony Holmes. Now, Anthony Holmes been home for maybe 5. How long Anthony been home? He just got home. He was locked up for 33 years. Now, he was one of the first torture survivors of John Burge. He was one of the first ones. Then you have Andrew Wilson, the Wilson brothers. If it had not been for the Wilson brothers, my case probably would have never been heard of. Or even the People's Law Office, which was, the People's Law Office is located on 1180 North Milwaukee. If it had not been for Flint Taylor and Jeffrey Haas and Joey Mongo, them people they should be celebrated because they fought for us and they fought for us and they fought for us. And then you had John Conroy. John Conroy was a reporter. He wrote a paper called, the name of the paper was called, the name of it is The Readers. It's a North Side paper. And he reported a story, it was called The House of Screams. And it was about us. We had no idea that he even knew anything about it. And he, and you know, people talk about, I don't dislike the police because I have police in my family. I wouldn't dislike them anyway because some of them do their job. They do what they're supposed to do. But then there's a lot of them that don't. And I don't want to condemn all of them because they out there and they do their job. So I'm not angry at them, but because the anger is gone, it's gone. I'm healing now. And this is what helps you or allows me to heal when I talk about it. This is a healing process for me. And see, I'm not trying to, what I really want to do is I'm not trying to, let me put my glasses on because I can't see that well. I done got a little older now. This conversation that I'm having with you, I wasn't trying to form it in no theories, but in real life, a real person, because I'm real, y'all. I'm a real human being. And this had a real impact on my community. It had a real impact on my family. I had a child. She's 34 years old now. One child when I left the world, and I think about, and I have 3 others now, and all of them are grown. I just had one of my daughters went to. She just graduated from the University of Missouri last year, and I'm real proud of her. I'm really proud of her. But I am a happy individual now. I was once angry all the time, but I'm not angry like that anymore. And I'm here, I'm a freedom fighter. I'm here to help whomever I can help, and I'm gonna fight this fight until the last breath. I'm gonna keep on fighting. I have to fight because people fought for me. Let me go back to these names. The Mahathi brothers. The Mahathi brothers been locked up 34 years. They are still locked up. Ali Hammond, he's out. Daryl Cannon did 23 years. He's out. AOC, he's out. He did 20 years. And in particular, Johnny Savior. Johnny Savior was 14 years old. They came and got him out of school and charged him with a double homicide. And he was convicted. And he'd been out maybe 7 years now, but he wound up doing 32 years for a crime that he didn't commit. Now just imagine this for real, just think about this. You are 14 years old, you are sitting in a classroom, and some police officers come and get you and take you out of there and charge you with a double homicide at the age of 14. That had to be a tremendous hardship for his family. 14 years old. So, and in conclusion, let me say this, that it is a pleasure that I am here. This is a day that I will never forget because it's Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. So, and I thank Valparaiso for giving me an opportunity to tell my story. So thank you.
So I'm just going to say a little bit about the center, but I would just invite us all to just take a breath.
Yes.
First. Yes. They're asking me to take that.
Okay. For our recording. Thank you.
To take a breath and feel your feet on the ground, feel your butt in the chair. That was a lot that we just heard. And so really wanting to recognize that violence has impact if you experience it directly, but also through hearing about it, through witnessing it. So just to have a second to reconnect with your body and what matters to you. I would say that the work, the stuff that Gregory described, it's, somewhat easy to imagine that there's a lot of wounds that come with experiencing that kind of violence. And it's because of the work that Gregory and other survivors did that in Chicago in 2015, they passed a reparations ordinance for survivors of racially motivated police violence, which is the first of its kind anywhere in the country. And one of the amazing things about the reparations ordinance is it's not just saying, here's some money, we'll throw it at your problem and this will fix everything, right? It's recognizing that there's a lot more that needs to be healed for survivors of violence. And so part of the reparations ordinance is a change in the school curriculum for 8th and 10th graders and the creation of a center, which is the Chicago Torture Justice Center, to provide healing services for survivors of police violence and their families. And I think one of the things that I just want to leave with is that recognizing that there's all kinds of ways that trauma impacts us, right? It's through direct experiences of violence like what Gregory described, but also for communities that are over-policed and experiencing that kind of police brutality on a daily basis. All of that leaves a message about your existence, how easily your life and your freedom can be taken away from you, and that has impact on us, right? So we're impacted by experience of violence, we're impacted by witnessing it, and we're impacted by all of the systems of oppression in this country that divide and destroy us, right? And so the work at the Chicago Torture Justice Center is really based on recognizing that kind of violence and our systems have this kind of impact on us, and that the healing work that we need to do to feel whole and to be able to dream and see what's possible again is really integral to our work towards justice. So I want to thank Gregory for sharing, and thank you all for inviting us here.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Greg and Cindy. We're going to go directly to the next presentation, but please be reassured that you will have some time to share your thoughts on the story that Greg just shared, or tweet them to the hashtags here. Up next, we have Bayan Fares, a social work and global services double major from Valparaiso University, and the president of the Muslim Student Association on campus. She will share with us her poem, I Am Traumatized, that touches on the Muslim experience when it comes to Islamophobia.
Sorry, 1 second. Okay, cool. I just want to do a quick sound check. So if I just talk like this, can everybody in the back hear me? Okay, cool. So I'm going to give a quick explanation of the poem before I begin reciting it. So we often hear about Islamophobia and Muslims when they are being attacked in their homes, or when they are being shot on the way to the mosque, or when they are being choked with their 9-year-old daughters present, or when they are being bombed by ISIS, or when they're refugees with nowhere to go, or when they're in the middle of a war. So I just want to start off by saying that the Muslim experience is more than that trauma and that violence and that despair. It is rich with culture and academics and inventions and history and great food. I originally didn't even want to speak at the violence track on behalf of the MSA because we're tired of people associating our faith with violence. But here I am. So what I ended up doing with this poem is, instead of talking about the generic theme of why Islam is not violent, to how Muslims endure violence. I also wanted to redefine the word trauma with this poem, that trauma is anything that changes the state of one's heart. That not only physical assaults are violent, but that Islamophobic occurrences and hateful words said over a period of time or by public officials can also be traumatizing to any Muslim citizen. This also involves questions of identity, of culture, and of gender that are embedded within this experience, and each experience is unique. But I'll share a little bit of what it feels like. So this poem was then, born, and as was introduced, it is titled, I Am Traumatized. How are you supposed to be whole when your body parts are fragmented and stripped from their soul, spread out across nations in ways that you cannot control? A diasporic community, all of them immigrants foreign to their soil,
but I'm not. I'm just as American as the next person who loves Queen Bee, but the fact that you don't see makes me angry at this world. And I want it to know everything. I want to stop hiding. Yes, I've been abused. I've been used, taunted, and robbed of my identity. I can't be me, because in this culture, a Muslim can never be truly free. I'm tired of being sorry. I'm tired of saying someone else's pain matters more. My pain is real too, and screw anyone who asks for a point to refer to. I am traumatized. But I'm also dehumanized, mocked at in my experiences, belittled. My soul becomes incapacitated and crippled. My experience is more than multifaceted, but my mind is not the only thing that is fragmented. My whole existence is too, and my family and history were never truly true, never totally complete, as I compete through this world of injustice. My family's lives are all settled in different spaces, their individual spatial matter occupying lands that are supposed to be theirs but never will be. The inhabitants of their countries have already issued that decree. While I'm fighting for my own identity, I wonder, how would life be truly different if life overseas for my family had remained consistent? Would it be a grave wound as a woman trapped in cultural superiority, or would I continue the pain of feeling like a Muslim American enemy, with no one ever validating my humanity? I am traumatized. I don't know where to look for support. I don't know how to get access to anything of that sort. If only I could rid of all of the judgment and negative vibes hidden in a friendly disguise. If only I could tap into my senses, I'll start to see my world through different lenses. I'll rid of the woman who yanks her daughter away from me, or the children who when they see a scarf flee, or the man who stares like I'm an oppressed nobody, or the classmate who spouts a theological catastrophe. This is how it feels when ignorant words strike the hearts of those who are different, a catastrophe, a destruction of someone's identity. It feels like a belittlement of being, like a collection of colonial conspiracies to prove intellectual inferiority, like trauma being shoved into one's mentality. I feel like I'm surrounded by shallow people who don't want to step out of their shells and see that their words rip me to shreds. I feel like I'm trapped in a cycle circling around my cynical being. It's a rope attached to my neck, strangling, yanking me backwards every time I take a single step. I want to move forward, outward, towards my future, but I can't seem to picture what that would look like or what would be the next rumor. Was it a Muslim this time? An immigrant loser? No, it was just a homegrown insane shooter. Let's forget the double standards here and take it with a little humor. No. What has been said has already spread. I feel like a being sitting, slipping away in the midst of the air. No one can see me dying from despair. I am screaming inside, screeching to the top of my lungs, squealing and weeping as I go along with my day. Because I can cry and put on a smile, you'd never ask what was wrong. Preach all you want, but the lesson to teach that is always taught is that you should not put into speech what is culturally and contextually out of your reach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, please take a few moments. We have some reflection questions up here. We'd like you to talk to a person next to you about some of these questions, or if you'd like, you could tweet them to the hashtags that are up here. VU that strives to support, educate, and advocate for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community, safe spaces, and allyship between students, regardless of identity.
Thank you so much for that. Good afternoon. My name is Mooney. I use they, them pronouns. This is Perry. Perry also uses they, them pronouns. And this is Sawyer, who uses he, him pronouns. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the experience of transgender individuals in the regular community and how that relates to violence. Oh, can you press it again? Thanks. Okay, so a little bit of background. What does transgender mean? Transgender individuals, when you're born, you are assigned a gender based on the appearance of your genitals by a doctor or your parent or a religious figure or whoever. And a transgender individual at a certain point in their life decides that the gender that they are in reality doesn't match what they were assigned at birth. This includes non-binary and gender fluid people who don't identify necessarily with male or female on either end of the spectrum. Cool. Now I'll turn it over to Sawyer.
Thank you. There are many different types of violence and ways that can affect the transgender community. While social violence may not seem as important or as extreme as something like legal or physical violence, it can have a very serious effect on the transgender community and how it is perceived by the rest of society. One of the main places that this is shown is in media representation, as media representation is the way that most people are exposed to transgender individuals and their stories. And the stories that TV shows and movies choose to show impact how the general population will view and understand the transgender community. Media representation as it stands today is something of a mixed bag for the trans community. There are good shows that have complex and well-rounded characters played by transgender actors, but more often, TV shows choose to play transgender characters off as either victims or villains, limiting their stories to these narratives only. There's also a rampant use of slurs and mockery that often accompanies trans characters from other characters in the show. For example, there was a CSI episode where the main characters found a body of a transgender woman and proceeded to mock her throughout the episode. In movies especially, directors and producers have preferred casting cisgender actors to play transgender characters, which can both affect the authenticity of how those character stories are told, as well as the job opportunities for transgender actors, which are currently very slim to begin with. Representation is also particularly lacking for stories of trans people of color, as the majority of the trans characters shown on TV are typically white. Another way that there is social violence is in the political climate. Much of politics is taken up arguing about legal issues such as use of bathrooms and what constitutes discrimination. Some political changes are for the better, for example, housing protections for transgender individuals, but many rules are not enforced or even known. There are some positive changes that are coming. For example, in the last round of elections, 3 transgender individuals were elected to prominent positions in their communities. Most notably Danica Rome, who was elected to the Virginia state government. However, these individuals will continue to face serious challenges. For example, her election was met with transphobia from the Republicans of the House, who have promised to use gender-neutral forms of address to avoid acknowledging Ms. Rome as a woman. Misgendering is also a very big problem in media representation, as much news and media misgenders and dead names individuals, using previous names and gender identities in inappropriate ways without knowing that this is inappropriate. Many interviewers ask incredibly personal or inappropriate questions without understanding why it would make their interviewees uncomfortable. Misgendering has also been a problem in identifying hate crimes, as police assume one gender without getting confirmation, which prevents the crime from being reported as a hate crime. Lack of education is a serious problem for the transgender community, as many people in general society do not have a lot of experience that they know of working with transgender individuals, and this can cause difficulty on both sides. Many people use terms or even slurs without knowing what they mean and are not aware of what is considered appropriate or not in terms of dead naming, etc. The lack of common practice introducing pronouns when introducing yourself can also be difficult on transgender individuals who feel it necessary to do so. The transgender community is also affected by difficulty achieving education. For a variety of reasons, including bullying, poor mental health, and homelessness, it is not unusual for transgender teens not to make it out of high school. The dropout rates are staggering, with more than 50% of New York public school trans teens saying they avoid going to school on a regular basis. If they do make it to college, many times grades there will suffer as well, as mental health issues and a lack of access to affordable health care take a toll on students. This is exacerbated by uncompromising administration and a difficulty having things like gender or names changed in databases. more than just social violence, the transgender community also faces a lot of legal violence, which Perry will tell you more about.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, well, we'll try harder. Okay. So the life expectancy of a trans person as of 2017 is 30 to 32 years, which has gone up since 2014, where it used to be just 25. In 2017, 28 trans murders were reported, 23 of which were trans people of color, and 17 were black. The majority of these murders remained unsolved and have come without justice. So we have the names up here. If you could just take a moment to read them all and reflect and kind of just take it in. A little bit of respect would be nice too. So in relation to news stories like Sawyer Moody had mentioned before, the bathroom bill, House Bill 2, I believe, was passed in 2016, which prohibited trans people from using the restrooms that corresponded with their identities, and it gave authorities authorization to go in after suspecting individuals to make sure that they aligned with the restroom they should be in. In Indiana, I think to have your gender changed on your driver's license, you have to show proof of sex reassignment surgery. And then Sawyer's going to talk a little bit about the more recent and most popular one, which is the military trans ban.
The military trans ban got a lot of press over the summer when Trump first announced it via Twitter. And basically what it means is that transgender individuals will not be able to serve openly in the United States military, and any transgender veterans will not be able to receive assistance with any transitional-related medical costs in the future. This is a problem because as many as 15,000 military personnel are estimated to be transgender. Many people say that's much higher if that would be much higher if people were more comfortable coming out. The ban has been challenged, and as of October, it was blocked by the federal courts. However, the issue is still up for debate, and what ultimately happens, we won't know.
I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about healthcare and the accessibility to transgender individuals. Only 16 states have specific plans and prohibit line item shifts for transgender care. And in 2016, the Department of Health established that the Affordable Care Act did include transgender needs, anything that would be necessary for their health. As far as housing, only recently has housing been sort of accepting for transgender individuals. A lot of the times it's been exclusionary in housing that is meant for just one of the sexes or one gender. But in 2015, it was established that included the gender discrimination, also included transgender individuals in those housings after an event with the Salvation Army who rejected a trans woman and she died in the cold that night. Okay. So we want you guys to take a moment and discuss what can you do either in your personal lives, locally, federal, state. Just talk amongst yourselves and maybe throw us a few ideas, because we just kind of want to get it going and what gauge you have on the situation. Yeah.
I'm going to yell in a minute and ask. Yeah. I'm going to give him another minute.
When you're all ready, if you could raise your hands and pitch some ideas to the front, that would be awesome. Thank you. Yeah?
At the local level, people can organize. In Chicago, many groups join together, immigrant groups and LGBT groups join together for the city ID program, which will allow a person to identify their gender as they identify.
Right.
And the name that they want on this ID. And it also it's helpful for undocumented immigrants as well, who aren't able to get a state ID otherwise, etc. But anyway, that's just one example of a long, hard fight that was successful in terms of allowing people to be able to prove their identity as they choose.
Right, that's awesome. Thank you. Go ahead.
At the state or federal level, you can always write to like your congressman or like a representative if a law that you want to pass or a issue.
Absolutely. So that was that you should write to your congressman or your government officials asking for more inclusive laws. Anyone else? Oh, hey.
On a personal level, you can use the person's correct pronouns. That helps, and accompany them to unsafe places such as bathrooms and public areas if they're afraid or hesitant to go in there on their own.
Right, so making sure to properly gender people and maybe in some cases accompany them to restrooms or places that they might feel unsafe.
Personally, as a transgender person, I think that it's important to also be a resource of education. Because a lot of people don't understand the non-binary person as someone who identifies non-binary. I can't always conceptualize what it means to be non-binary. So having that conversation, having an open conversation with what that means to you is so important, because I won't ever be able to conceptualize what it means to be non-binary because I don't have that experience. But being able to empathize and being able to kind of come together on terms and being able to educate each other is what's important.
Right, so as a trans person, being available to educate others. And I'll add to that even, as an ally, a friend of a trans person or someone who just understands more what's going on than your average American, being willing to talk to people who aren't trans about issues, making sure they understand before the uncomfortable conversation with a trans person happens. That's super helpful as well. Anyone else?
That you guys had some good conversations during the break, and now we're ready for the keynote speech of this track. Up next is our keynote speaker, Rathika Sharma Gordon from Abnagar, a 28-year-old organization here in Chicago focusing on Asian, African, and Middle Eastern immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. Rathika came to the United States in 1967 from Nairobi, Kenya, which had been home for her family since her grandparents immigrated from India to East Africa under British colonial rule in the early 1900s. With a BA and her master's in public health from the University of Michigan, she has, since 1989, been working and volunteering in Chicago to provide community and professional education and coordinate community engagement addressing disease, violence, the needs of immigrant communities, women's empowerment, and positive youth development. Rathika is an adjunct instructor in community health and wellness at Northeastern Illinois University, where she coordinates the field placement program. Given Rathika's extensive work in the last 30 years on violence prevention, community health, gender-based violence, and immigrants' rights, she is a thought leader who is helping the local domestic violence movement to develop connections with other sectors and broaden its focus. Let's welcome Rathika.
As close as possible. Oh yeah, not a problem. For the recording here, and that's for this. I'm a chronic fidgeter, so I'm going to need to
be able to move while I talk to you all. So good morning. I'm going to be skipping through a few of these slides today because I think there's just so many incredible points that were raised earlier by the speakers and the poet and the students who were sharing stories that I want to be able to focus on some of the larger issues, mainly how immigrant women experience intimate partner violence and the special barriers they face. And then I want to look at the approach we use, and then I want to take some time for you all. I have some reflection questions for you that I'm going to share at the end. So let me get right into it. Okay, so our story. Back in the 80s in the Chicago area, a group of Indian women formed the Indo Crisis Line, which was a volunteer staffed hotline for people in the Indian and Pakistani community who had emigrated to the United States to talk about problems that they were having and to talk about issues. And one of the things that they were hearing a lot of was people reporting intimate partner violence, and they were reporting that they didn't feel comfortable going to the regular shelters. You know, I can't keep my Muslim halal diet, I can't keep my Hindu vegetarian diet. They don't understand what, I would have to speak in English and it's not my first language. They're gonna look at me funny. I would need to pray 5 times a day. How can I do that in a regular shelter? They might eat pork. A variety of issues where they just didn't feel comfortable or welcome in, or thought they wouldn't be welcomed into local domestic violence programs. At the same time, in Chicago at Asian Human Services, 2 of the advocates there, a counselor and a hate crimes advocate, were hearing similar stories, and they said, we have to do something. So they came together, and it was a group of 5 women, a Korean American professor, 3 Indian American women, and a Filipino American woman, who said, we're going to start Apnaghar, which in Hindi and Urdu, one of the major languages of South Asia, of India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. In Hindi, Urdu, it means our home. And they rented an apartment with 2 bedrooms and had a tiny office in the Uptown Bank building on the north side of Chicago, and that began Apnaghar. And as the barriers that clients experienced unfolded more and more, our expertise had to grow. And our programming had to grow to meet the multiple complex needs. We needed bilingual staff. We needed to learn more about immigration law, family law, child custody, divorce, etc., and the Illinois Domestic Violence Act. And then as the years unfolded, the Violence Against Women Act, a federal law that has a huge impact on immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. So the expertise grew, the staff grew, word got out, and we're in a unique situation. The Indian American community in the United States has a newspaper that has worldwide distribution. So here we were, this tiny startup nonprofit, and people all over the world were reading about us. And so it was an interesting situation. So we had people talking and asking about us, and of course we had a lot of pushback as well. People who thought that we might be breaking families up or airing the dirty laundry of a community that's trying to establish itself in the larger culture. So, there were barriers along the way. So our mission is to provide holistic or comprehensive services to survivors of gender-based violence. So when I say holistic or comprehensive, I mean we have a 24-hour hotline, counselors, legal advocates, a case manager, a transitional housing program, a temporary emergency shelter, a supervised child visitation program for people who, when there's domestic violence in their relationship, when one of the partners chooses to use violence, and if they go to court, they have children together, the judge might say you have to the non-custodial parent can only visit with a child or children in supervised settings. And so we have a supervised child visitation program, and then we have what I do, which is going out and doing a lot of training and education and trying to get professionals in the community to better understand the needs of immigrant survivors and to better understand gender-based violence and the role they play. So that's what partially what brings me here to all of you today. This, I'm just showing you, it's impossible for you to read, and I know that, but what we really want you to do is look at this. This is developed by the Asian Pacific Institute on gender-based violence, a program out in San Francisco, and it shows from infancy to the elderly years the cycle of oppression that Asian American women face. Many of us, we come from cultures where, in India, my grandparents all stayed in India, and we stayed in, our northern area of Punjab. There were girls who were being thrown in the river. A female child was born, there was infanticide, not because there was something wrong with the females, but because of the social structures, the community practices of individuals. A girl was a real problem to have. A girl meant that you needed to have a dowry, an expensive wedding, and she was going to leave and not contribute to the family, whereas a son would would help in the family business, bring in a dowry when he gets married, and the assumption was that he would marry a woman, she would produce grandchildren, and he would stay there, and she would help with the domestic labor. And so because of those practices and those chosen traditions that were perpetuated, a girl child was not wanted as much. So anyway, from the very beginning, sex-selective abortion, when new technologies emerged that would allow a couple to find out the sex of their child, not feeding or educating the girl child as well as the boy, physical abuse, sexual abuse, molestation, coerced sexual initiation, rape in the teenage years, dating violence, harassment as young adults, sexual assault, denied choice of marriage partner and or sexual orientation, dowry-related deaths, sexual harassment at work and college. As adults, domestic violence, coercion into pregnancy, regardless of whether they wanted to be pregnant, which of course would mean sexual assault, withholding adequate food, clothing, daily necessities. And then as elders, widows have very limited rights in India and in many other countries. And so not allowed to own property. That used to be a common practice. So a great deal of disempowerment of an already vulnerable group. So through the life cycle, not just in India, but in various areas of the world, there is this cycle of oppression that's known throughout the lifetime. So what we do. At Upnagar, we're focused on issues, and we're focused on the community, and we're focused on systems. And then when we work individually with a client, we are very client-centered. We're the client who's, and people come to us, survivors of gender-based violence come to us, mostly through, phone calls. They might walk into our office. Usually they're referred by somebody else. Often they look up on the web and find out about us and call us. Or, as often happens, they are referred by other former clients of ours. And gender-based violence, I'm talking primarily about domestic violence between two married partners, but also dating violence. We provided shelter to a trans woman from another country who was being persecuted by her government and abused physically by her family, and we provided her shelter and transitional housing assistance in our shelter facility. So we conduct outreach, and I'm going to show you and go into more detail about the systems change, because that's just a focus, obviously, of today. So, hundreds of people we're serving every, men, women, and children, take thousands of crisis calls every year, and reaching 4,000 plus people every year through our outreach, through our education, through our information dissemination, through technical assistance. When people call up and ask, do you know somebody at the University of Chicago who is familiar with the West African community? We have a student here who's, really afraid of going home to her husband. Can you tell me about where we can get Urdu language translation of domestic violence law? Because we're working with an Urdu-speaking client, and we need that, glossary. So we're able to do these technical assistance questions to help others serve immigrants as well. The majority of our clients now come, we focused in the beginning on the Indian and Pakistani community. We have since broadened our focus as this huge gap was there that we needed to step into, to also provide services to women from other areas of Asia, including the Middle East and from Africa, and then for a good amount of time, also women who were Bosnian refugees. So more than 50 countries our clients come from, and our staff at any one time usually speaks collectively about 15 to 21 different languages. Funding and finances, blah, blah, blah. We can find more about that on our website. Let's get into the really important stuff. So this, and I was really happy to see the previous speakers talking about the different levels at which people can take action. When people ask, why doesn't that person leave their abusive partner? Why don't they just leave? Why don't they just say, forget it, I don't have to put up with this, and we say, that's not the question to ask. The question to ask is, why do we as a society allow that person to abuse her? And where did that person get the message that it was okay to do this? Because domestic abusers, many of them are abusing multiple survivors, so there's a smaller population of those who choose to use abuse chronically than those of us who have been affected by gender-based violence, because that group has multiple victims, okay? So abusers, multiple victims, and then the largest group, all of us who are bystanders, all of us who sit by and allow the grandparents to just focus on, oh, isn't our granddaughter pretty? Isn't our grandson smart and strong? To the messages that, no, we can't speak out, and allowing mostly boys to speak out in class and not encouraging the girls' voices, and showing videos and commercials and et cetera that give the idea that violence and sexualized violence is okay. And the more sex you have, the more of a man you have. The more sex you have, the more of a slut you are if you're a woman. All of those norms, practices, and protocols, like the nightmare protocol at that university where the young woman was pretty much shut down by the administrator who was supposed to be there to help her and to make sure that she was getting full access to education in an environment in which she felt respected and safe. So when the question, which we want you to help us turn around, why does it go on and why do we allow it to go on? Why does it go on? At the individual level, I'm a public health geek. My training's in public health, so we use the socio-ecological model. Some of you who are studying social work might also know it as, the micro, meso, and macro levels. But anyway, at the individual level, there's if somebody's born with a disability, including a mental disability, they're at higher risk. They are in a higher risk group. During pregnancy, a lot of domestic violence begins during pregnancy. Family and peers. What are the practices of your peer group, of your family group? What are the messages that you have gotten regarding the roles, and just, sorry about just sticking to a binary right now, but what are the roles of men, of women? What happens when somebody steps out of those assigned dominant culture, gendered norms? What do your friends seem to think is the right of men and boys? Do they promote the sense that we should all feel safe and respected in our relationships. In your community, and that could be your geographic community, your chosen identity community, who's praised, who's discouraged? Are there stigmas against leaving a relationship, speaking out and saying this person hurt me? Or saying I left that relationship even though this person was really well liked and charismatic, I was abused in that situation. What are the institutions doing? In a school, think back to high school. It's a lot further back for me than it is for most of you, but think back to high school. Who would be more likely to be punished for an act of sexual violence? A young man of color or the captain of the football team who's got a very promising college future? Same crime, different accountability mechanisms. Why? We have to question our institutions and the way they mete out justice. And at the global and political economy level, unequal pay. Our clients, the issue of economic opportunity is very real. Many of them have been disempowered. Many of them haven't been taught to speak English in their homes, or even though their husbands have often, they haven't often been taught marketable skills, which they can then go out and use and get a job right away upon leaving their abuser. No. Many of our clients don't know how to navigate the outer world. I mean, but we have got clients across the board. We have clients who are doctors and clients who are computer engineers and business owners, and we also have clients who never went further than the 4th grade. Most of the people who are coming to us because they have very limited means. So the majority of our clients are lower income because they have very limited choices. Whereas women, men who have a higher income might go to a private attorney, might go get their own place rather than going to a shelter, etc. They might seek other mechanisms of safety. But anyway, the gender gap is a huge issue. Clients feel, I can't afford this. I can't afford to get help or to support myself. So our focus is that gender-based violence is a human rights issue. It's not a women's issue, to go off to the side, because first of all, we know it's not just women who are being abused. And why focus on the gender of the survivors, and why are we not focusing on the gender of the perpetrators and questioning it? Are we really going to say boys will be boys? Or are we going to look at the way that we engender our sons? If you haven't seen it, there's a really wonderful documentary, The Mask You Live In. The Mask You Live In. It's a wonderful documentary on the way that we cripple boys emotionally, the way that we don't allow them to show their emotions, to express their hurt, and to express their sorrow, and the way that we, as was said, harden men and boys, and what happens then, their natural desire as human beings to express tenderness, to express hurt, to express pain. It's subverted in different ways. And so human beings aren't allowed to flourish as they should in these cultures where we allow really strict gendered norms. It's not just the oppressed groups who are mostly victims of violence, but we're also oppressing young men from their full expression of their own humanity. So anyway, it's a human rights issue, and that's our focus, and that's our approach. And I want to show you what our model is. So we're working at all of those levels. The individual level, working on the success, on the healing of our clients, working to support families and looking to build up support systems by educating individuals. If somebody in your family is a survivor of violence, they need your support, they don't need your blame. Organizations that are part of the community, the various systems, not just the immigration system, but making sure that the Chicago police, if they come to the house where there's domestic violence, they're called out, and somebody in the house doesn't speak English, the protocol is that they're supposed to obtain translation or live interpretation. Well, very often that doesn't happen. So who usually speaks English? The husband. Or they bring in the child who speaks English to interpret about what the father, in many cases has happened, the father and what he did. And so that's unacceptable. It's an unacceptable practice, and it's denying due process for individuals who don't speak English in terms of being heard properly by the authorities. So let me spell this out for you a little bit more. We work with individuals, counseling, advocating for survivors to receive legal and social services and housing and job training. We work at the community level to increase understanding of domestic violence, to build empathy for survivors and to build skills so people know how better to respond when somebody discloses to them that they are a survivor of violence. We also then advocate for improvements in the criminal justice system and immigration laws, et cetera, and then we advocate on a global scale. So in Illinois, we signed on to the Domestic Workers' Rights Act because that was, many of our clients are survivors of, are rather working as domestic workers. And there are many women and men who are working to clean houses, take care of children, and many of them are being sexually abused or are being, they're experiencing wage theft. And so these issues are all interrelated. So we also fight for the rights of low-income individuals, and we fight for rights of immigrants to be able to work and to be educated and access health care, and because it's all interrelated. So my challenge to you, and I'll stop now because we've got some really wonderful previous speakers whom you might have questions for, is to look at this. To prevent gender-based violence, to reduce the risk factors for gender-based violence occurring, and to promote protective factors that'll change the norms, the practices, the protocols, the laws. What can you do at individual level, family, community, institution, socio-political? I want you at some point, and if we don't have time now, at some point to ask yourself, what were the messages, what were the practices in my home? What have my peers said about gender and about power? What does my community celebrate? What does my community punish? Or what would be something that I could do that my community might want to shun me for? What are the laws and the practices in the institutions I belong to? And what impact do they have on gender and on power, on the use of abuse, on oppression of people who are deemed less valuable somehow in society? Nothing wrong with them, but society decides that they're not as valuable, and therefore they are more likely to be targeted. What can you do at each of these levels? How have you been impacted? What are the messages and practices and norms? What change can you implement at these levels? We've got some ideas up here, but you guys are all brilliant. You're experts in your own lives, and so you can come up with some ideas of your own for changes that you can implement at those levels. So I thank you all very much.
Let's go ahead and start. The first question is a question for Alliance, and it's, could you define cisgender?
Cisgender is, thank you. Cisgender is sort of the complementary term to transgender. Cisgender is anyone who the gender they experience is the gender that they were assigned. it's basically the opposite of transgender, where the gender you experience is not the gender you were assigned.
Bayan, the question's for you, and is how do we go about tearing down the stereotypes of the Muslim faith?
Just a few things that come to mind are, so at my mosque, I go to the Northwest Indiana Islamic Center. If you're involved in just some interfaith work, if you're involved in a church or something, we usually have church groups and interfaith groups just come to our mosque all the time. And there's even classes here. I know when Professor Truxton was here, she used to bring down, so I see some students came for her class as a trip to the mosque just to get to know some Muslim, what our prayers are like, what our faith is like. We also do have on campus the Muslim Student Association, which I'm president of, which is why I'm here today. So we have some events, coming up this semester. Sun Awareness Week is in April, I think the week of April 16th. So there's events that are going on campus. Also, I want to recommend a YouTube series. I can't remember the name of the series. I think it's called Out of Context by Imam Omar Sulaiman, and there's also a pastor in there. I think his name is Pastor Mike. We kind of double up together and kind of like break down some of like the major stereotypes. So it really is just, just like research, try to step out of your shell a little bit and just talk to someone, ask someone a question. Just as long as you're respectful, I think anybody's willing to answer those questions, and hopefully that'll overcome stereotypes.
It says, is your organization addressing death at the hands of police, past or present?
Yeah, here.
Oh, it says, is your organization addressing death at the hands of the police, past or present?
So it's a new organization because it's came out of the 2015 reparations ordinance, and so we're serving all people who are impacted by police violence, individuals, communities, family members. So that includes people who have experienced a family member loss of life, murder from the police. But we're very much survivor-led, so we have a survivor family advisory committee that meets monthly that's helping us determine what our organizing platform will look like, what our policy platform will look like, how we want to show up in spaces in the communities and working with people. So it's something we're definitely going to be doing, but how it's going to look is still up.
Friends, we can get cozy. Oh, sure, yes. Okay, so the question is, are there any trends in the field that are giving you hope? And I would say, yeah, there is always something good happening everywhere. It's one of the things I try to tell my daughter in terms of coping with the world. Believe me, there's always something good happening. In our field, addressing gender-based violence, there's wonderful ways that silos are being broken down between separate systems. Unfortunately, the domestic violence sector has been at odds with the child welfare sector. There are many people who are working for DCFS, as we call it in Illinois, Child Protective Services, where if you're a mother and your children, you've got children in the home and your partner is abusing you, you are being punished and you might lose custody of your children. And you're being blamed for the abuse. We know that children who are growing up in homes where there is violence, by all means, it has an impact on them. Higher rates of substance abuse, higher rates of suicide. 80 to 90% of children asked about the domestic violence in their home can describe it in detail. Often parents think they're hiding it from the children, but no, that's not the case. So we know it's a child, it traumatizes children. However, the child welfare system often is punishing the survivors of the violence. So now one of the things that's being done that's very innovative and is being done in Florida and is now being done in Illinois in 2 or 3 areas throughout Illinois is that they have put a domestic violence advocate in DCFS offices. and not off to the side, but like placing them right in the center there, where they can talk to and consult with the child welfare workers. And that is what is hope is going to make some systemic change in a system in which so many women, and it's primarily African American, lower income women who are losing custody of their children. And so there's also the Family Defense Center, which is started, which is also a really great resource for women who are losing custody of their children from DCFS. There's a really great group called Healing to Action, which two lawyers who were working with many lower income women, primarily migrant workers and domestic workers, who had various stories about sexual violence in the workplace and domestic violence in their lives. So they formed a new organization called Healing to Action, because that's one of the things that, for whatever reason, the women's movement has not done enough for lower income women, for lower income working women, etc. So Healing to Action is an organization that Upnagar is now working with, and we're going to be having an event with them next week where in multiple languages they're going to get a chance to talk to women who are of a lower income and about the violence in their lives. And it's part of a research study they're doing with UIC. And the last thing is in my own home. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and many years ago when she was going to 7th or 8th grade, I said to her, you know, Ronnie, you can't wear those, the leggings and just the short t-shirt and the t-shirt to school. It's distracting. I can, your bottom is outlined there. It's not appropriate for the school environment. And she said, why should I be punished, and why should I have to change what I'm wearing if other people can't keep their eyes where they're supposed to be? She taught me a lesson. She challenged me, and I'm so proud of her, and she made me think twice, and it's true. Why are they sending girls home to change and not, on the other side of the equation, saying to whoever, boy or girl, whoever, or teacher, who says something to them, keep your eyes on your paper. It's not your business. It's not okay for you to comment on what somebody else is wearing, unless they're wearing something that has an offensive slogan on it. It's, no, but there's no mechanism to address those who are ogling and sexually harassing in the classroom. So I'm very, very glad that she challenged and pushed me back. And it's a sign that things are changing. And I'm glad she has that sensibility.
What can non-Muslims do to help Muslims, especially in the Midwest, feel more welcome and safe? So I was just thinking of a few things. Number one would probably be prayer spaces. So even on campus, it's actually going to be confirmed this week, hopefully, that there's going to be more of an open prayer space for Muslims on campus. So we're still trying to get that confirmed and settled. But one of the reasons why it's really important is because the entire fall semester I was working on trying to get it established, and since I was a freshman, they've been talking about getting an inclusive and welcome prayer space for Muslims because we need to pray, we have Friday prayer and all of those things, but specifically last year when all of the elections and all of the Trump rhetoric was going on, you feel isolated, you feel excluded from your own community, even when you are welcome in the buildings that you're at. For me, social work and DC and the international building, those are places you feel welcome, but when the rhetoric is going on, you feel very excluded. So you want to be around people who are like you. You want to go to a prayer space, even if it's for all faiths. I know one of the examples I kept using was Benedictine University, which is in Naperville, not an hour and a half away from here. They have a whole wall. It's an interfaith room of just a prayer wall, and Muslims are welcome there. Every faith is welcome there, and they all pray for each other. It's just to show some sort of inclusivity, some sort of safety, just kind of like a safe haven, I guess, or just somewhere where you can feel welcome. One thing that you can do also is support prayer spaces and mosques that are trying to be built. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Carmel. I think it's Carmel, Indiana. It's about an hour away from here. They're trying to get a mosque built there, and they are facing a lot of opposition from their neighbors and from the people around them who don't want them to have that space. There's a petition, and something's going on. So if you want to just look up Carmel, Indiana Mosque, you can try to help them out and try to just get it established. It literally is like these centers are the center of our identities, and it's where we come together when we're usually, the only, Muslim or one or two. Some other things I need to do, I know my mosque specifically hired lobbyists to go down to the capital of Indiana to lobby on behalf of Muslims, because there are actually bills trying to be passed against like the Muslim ban, and our representatives are trying to pass laws like that, laws against Muslims. So that's really important. But I do want to mention that some of those things might be out of reach for some people. So at the very, very, very least, something that every single one of us can ever afford, a religious or a cultural group, is to not digest stereotypes complicitly. Just reflect on what is around you, what's on your news feed, and just think, why? Or is this really how it is? Is this really the reality? If you want to disagree with it, fine, but at least don't be complicit in our culture. At least have an opinion about what's going on and stuff like that. I do have another question. I don't know if anybody else. Do you guys have? Do you have
Well, go ahead. And I'm sorry, you're for the TV.
Oh, no, that's fine.
They need to. Yeah.
Okay. The other question was, how do you feel about the Crusader being the school mascot? Since we all know the Crusaders were a terrible time for Muslims and Jews. So I don't want to say that I'm neutral on this issue. I've thought about it a little bit. I know specifically when I was a sophomore, our previous president, who's now graduated, we were talking about trying to get this changed. We've written letters to the president of the university, and we've tried to just start a conversation about what it means to have a Crusader as our mascot. I don't think that those conversations ever went anywhere. I can't remember if he ever got a response. Yeah, I don't really know what I think about it. I certainly don't celebrate it. I know if you know the history of what the Crusaders did to Muslims and Jews and stuff like that, then you recognize it. You can look up some history about it, but getting a conversation started about it is, I don't like to just say this is bad, let's just change it all, and it's my way or no way. But just getting a conversation started about what it means to have that as our mascot, I think is important. Whether that's one of the goals I want to achieve before I graduate this year, I don't know, but we'll see what happens.
I'll just sit next to you.
Okay.
Okay. So how can society work to change the culture that has been the norm for centuries in order to improve human rights for women and everyone? One of the things to remember is that we've got a very, very narrow view of history. The very first domestic violence shelter was in the 1600s in Istanbul, Turkey, and it was run, it was a dervish convent. It was run by Muslim women from the Sufi sect, who were nuns living in a dervish convent. The other, around the same time in the 1600s in Meiji, Japan, what were known as the divorce temples. If a woman had to escape an abusive father or husband, she could go to a Buddhist temple. And if she lived there for 2 years, learned a craft so that she could be able to support herself, she could be granted a divorce. So we have to remember that there has been resistance and safety and recognition of abuse in all of these cultures that are, considered to be just only oppressive towards women. There have been brilliant women leaders, and there have been brilliant religious leaders who have spoken out about compassion. In Nigeria, in the Middle East, a group of young Christian girls were abducted by ISIS, and many of them made their way back. They were sexually assaulted, made sex slaves by ISIS, and the imam, the religious leader, when they came back, girls across the world were being shunned who were, abducted. In those circumstances, and their communities were shunning them, and they had a miserable life. This imam said, these girls are coming back as heroes. They've survived atrocities, and they should not be ashamed, and we should not treat them with shame. So we're seeing people, we need to educate ourselves better about the history
of resistance and working against oppression, and recognize that it's not as simple as like, oh, these third world countries and they're so oppressive towards women. We see things happening, being perpetrated by those who have the greatest power in this country. And so it doesn't belong, the oppression isn't just one group, but educate ourselves on the history, hold up the history that shows examples of people who have fought against gender oppression and violence, and also make sure that you also hold up those heroes, those unsung heroes and heroines who are speaking up for survivors and who are challenging the norms and who are saying, so what if his girlfriend is talking to another guy? It doesn't give you the right to go report on her and think that he as her boyfriend has to punish her for talking to another guy. What right do you have and what right would he have to punish her for talking to another guy? You know, there are these assumptions that go with a lot of behavior that we as bystanders see that we have to challenge and question. And it doesn't have to be done in a in-your-face, call-out, violent way. It can just be a matter of asking questions. Why do you think that's okay for you to do? And what's wrong if she's talking to somebody else? And do you really think it's his role to punish her? Why? You know, gentle, persistent questioning can often be just as effective or more effective than just saying, you're a sexist, you're a pig, you're a misogynist, because that shuts the dialogue down.
I don't have any more.
Are there any other questions?